Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at Panasonic LUMIX S9. First of all, it is what a lot of people asked for. Flat compact cameras are very popular nowadays, so it makes sense that Panasonic has invested resources into releasing one. LUMIX S9 builds on the success of the S5 II. It offers a lot of features from the S5 II in a more street and trail-friendly package. In this video, we will take a look at the performance and features of the S9 and also at some pictures from Osaka and Kyoto. The biggest highlight of the S9 is, in my opinion, the packaging, so let's start with that. Panasonic has managed to pack a full-frame sensor with very effective in-body image stabilization and a large BLK22 battery in a camera body that is just 12.6 cm wide. It is actually narrower than the X106, which uses an APS-C sensor and a much smaller battery. The S9 weighs just 486 grams, including the battery. Obviously, some compromises had to be made to achieve this kind of extreme packaging, but I will say right away that Panasonic has, in my opinion, chosen the right set of compromises. I will explain that throughout this video. The overall size of the camera setup will also be largely determined by the lenses, but I will talk about that later. The design is very minimalistic and I think that it looks really good. It is available in green, red, blue and black version. I went with the green one, I think that it looks great and I also appreciate that various color options are available. The build quality is completely fine. It probably wasn't possible to use a full magnesium frame because of the size, so it may not feel quite as solid as the S5 II, but I am still happy with the build quality. The weather sealing is also limited, but it will survive a reasonable amount of bad weather. The S9 uses a 24 megapixel backside illuminated full-frame sensor, most likely carried over from the S5 II. In this case, the main highlight of this sensor is the fact that you can have it in a 12.6 cm wide camera. It seems to be the faster version with 40 frames per second readout. Other than that, it performs much like any other 24 megapixel full-frame backside illuminated sensor. Judging by the comments on my latest videos about 24 megapixel full-frame cameras, it seems that 24 megapixels is still enough for intended purposes and the target audience is fine with this resolution. Also, there is no low-pass filter on this sensor, which means that it captures more detail than some other 24 megapixel full-frame cameras. Much like the S5 II, it takes very nice pictures and videos in the real world. The RAWs are not compatible with the Lightroom yet, but ISO performance will be identical to the S5 II and very similar to all other backside illuminated full-frame sensors after downsampling. ISO 3200 is very clean and perfectly usable. There is some noise at ISO 6400, but it is fine for the majority of publication platforms. ISO 12800 is still usable, you will see some noise, but it is okay for online publishing. ISO 25600 is an emergency option. The S9 also offers dual native ISO, much like the S5, which is very nice to see in this category. The dynamic range is also pretty much the same as with other backside illuminated full-frame sensors and therefore outstanding. For digital publishing, you have basically unlimited options to use highlights and shadow sliders. I generally don't think that the dynamic range will limit your printing or publishing options as long as you avoid using very high ISO. 96 megapixel pixel shift mode is available and it works very well. It also works in handheld mode and high-resolution images can be processed in the camera, so it is pretty much the best implementation of high-resolution feature available at the moment. The color science seems to be carried over from the S5 II after firmware updates. The standard picture profile offers pretty high saturation and contrast, but the dynamic range was improved over early S5 II firmware versions. The real-time LUTs are a pretty big deal with the S9. These are pretty much color grading settings that can be imported to the camera and applied to your stills and video. A big improvement is that the LUTs can now be applied to any picture style, not just the vlog, so they don't need to limit the ISO range. You can either create your own LUTs or you can download them from the LUMIX Lab app. LUMIX Lab also allows you to very conveniently download pictures from the camera to your smartphone using very fast 5 GHz Wi-Fi and apply the LUT afterwards, which is what I prefer to do. You can also edit the pictures pretty extensively in the app or even create your own LUT. I usually don't care that much about camera apps, but this one is really good and I will make a separate video about it in the near future. Besides that, the picture styles known from previous Panasonic cameras, such as neutral or Leica monochrome, are still available. The autofocus uses a hybrid system with phase detection points aided by Panasonic's DFD contrast-based system. It works basically the same as with the S5 II after the latest update, which means that it is great. In the stills mode, it is very fast, accurate, and there is no hunting at all. That applies to basically any situation, including backlit subjects and low-light situations. It also works really well for tracking. I was able to get a perfect hit rate with my standard walking towards the camera test. The video autofocus is great as well. The usual stuff about the speed, accuracy, and the lack of hunting applies here as well. After the updates, I would say that the behavior of the autofocus system when it comes to choosing what to actually focus on might be the best on the market at the moment. It can do all of my tests with no issues at all, including the more difficult tests such as the one with SD card. The face tracking and subject detection works great as well. Overall, I am very happy with the autofocus system. Face detection was a huge step forward for Panasonic, and the S9 is another camera that greatly benefits from that decision. The S9 does not have a mechanical shutter. I think that it is not an issue for intended purposes, and it is one of the acceptable space-saving measures. A small percentage of people will disagree, and Panasonic will be more than happy to sell them an S5 II. It can shoot up to 30 frames per second with autofocus continuous, which is a great option to have. It can also shoot 8 frames per second with autofocus continuous in high setting. The buffer can take 36 RAWs in 30 fps mode or 55 RAWs in 8 fps. That is pretty typical for this category. Fortunately, the S9 has a proper UHS 2 SD card slot, so buffer clearing is pretty fast. Possibly the most impressive thing about the S9 is the in-body image stabilization. The size to effectiveness ratio of this IBIS system is off the scale. Being able to offer any kind of in-body image stabilization in a full-frame camera that has battery oriented this way is a great achievement by itself. It seems that Panasonic was somehow able to retain the effectiveness of the S5 II stabilization despite the size of this camera. It is rated for only 5 stops, but don't pay attention to that. It is much better than that number might suggest. The highlight of this system is the walking, which is among the best of all cameras regardless of the size. Much like the S5 II, it trades the effectiveness for warping in the corners at ultra-wide focal lengths, but that is probably a good decision. It also works great for the usual stuff such as static shots, panning, and pointing the camera around. In the stills mode, I was easily able to get sharp images at 35mm at 1/2 of a second, which is an outstanding performance. Overall, huge thumbs up for the in-body image stabilization. The S9 is also quite serious about the video. Almost all specifications are surprisingly carried over from the S5 II. That means that it can shoot open-gate 3x2 6K video up to 30p in 10-bit 420. That is once again very impressive for this kind of camera. 4K 60p is available with 1.5x crop. The bitrate goes up to 150 megabits per second for 4K and 200 megabits per second for 6K, but in the real-world use, it is more than enough for intended purposes. The only catch when it comes to video are recording limits. Small size is the highest priority for the S9, so the cooling is quite limited. The 6K is limited to 10 minutes, 4K to 15 minutes, and Full HD to 20 minutes. It is what it is. If you need to record longer clips, Panasonic is again more than happy to sell you the S5 II or S5 IIX, which has the best overheating resistance in the category. The good news is that subsequent 15-minute 4K clips seem to be fine. A new feature is MP4 Lite, which shoots OpenGate 3x2 3.8K video at 50 megabits per second. Lower bitrate makes the processing and data transfer easier. The output quality with this setting is more than sufficient for intended purposes, so it is a nice option to have. It also retains all of the anamorphic capabilities of the S5 II, which means that it has anamorphic D-squeeze display option and anamorphic mode for stabilization. Especially if you use it with Surrey's compact Saturn series lenses, you can have incredibly compact and by anamorphic standards also very affordable setup. The handling is surprisingly good for such a small camera. There is no grip, which is once again a choice made to keep the camera as small as possible. If you would like to have a grip, you can use this small rig base plate with a grip extension, which also acts as an Arca plate. Especially if you decide to use the S9 with larger lenses, this grip extension will make a big difference. A very important part is the extension in the top right corner, which allows you to support the weight of the camera and lens with your thumb. I also appreciate proper strap mounts that don't require the use of those annoying little triangles. Fortunately, the S9 II has two command dials and a D-pad with buttons. You will be able to access all of the functions quite easily. A very positive surprise for me is the AF on button, which is usually not available on cameras of this size. There is also a well-positioned exposure compensation button. The only thing missing is the joystick, but Panasonic largely compensates that with probably the best touch functionality of all camera manufacturers. The Q menu will also help a lot. I got used to the fact that the preview is not full screen and I like it overall. It is a very fast and convenient way to change the most important settings on the go. The menu system is pretty much carried over from previous LUMIX S cameras. It is a good menu system and it is pretty well structured. The S9 is actually a relatively complex camera with a lot of options, so I recommend taking some time to explore it. One of the more controversial aspects of the S9 is the fact that there is no electronic viewfinder, but I 100% approve of that. As I've said before, a small 2.36 million dot 0.62 times magnification EVF, available on some cameras in this category, is in my opinion not worth the space and the extra cost. Not everybody will agree with me on that, but that is completely fine. The display is carried over from the S5 II and it is great. It is a 3-inch screen with 1.84 million dots. It is very sharp, bright and generally pleasant to use. In my opinion, it is a lot more pleasant than 2.36 million dot EVFs. The display is fully rotating. That would not be my choice, I much prefer a simple tilting screen which keeps the footprint of the camera small even when extended. I acknowledge that I am probably in a minority with this opinion and I understand the decision to go with a rotating screen. One of the most pleasant surprises with the S9 is the fact that it uses a big 2200 mAh BLK22 battery. It is rated for 470 shots, but the reality is much better. The battery life has been outstanding during my use. I was able to get through a day of my usual samples gathering with just a half of battery. Again, the packaging is extremely impressive and I think that the inclusion of a big battery was a good decision. The overall size of your S9 setup will obviously largely depend on the lens. Panasonic has released a 26mm f8 manual focus body cap style lens together with the S9. I'm actually happy that this lens exists. It seems that some of the people on the internet are taking this lens too seriously, but it is actually an interesting lens, as I will explain in a review very soon. Panasonic will later release a new 18-40mm kit lens, and that one will be a great match for the S9, so I am very much looking forward to that. I mostly use the S9 with f1.8 primes and 20-60 kit lens, and that was completely fine as well. Some of the Sigma DGDN lenses could also be a very good match for the S9. I think that there is also a solid chance that Panasonic will release some more compact primes with darker aperture in the future to match the size of the S9. To sum up, Panasonic LUMIX S9 is in my opinion a set of good decisions. First of all, I am very happy to see a compact, flat, full-frame camera from Panasonic. I am a big fan of the GX9 and I accept the S9 as the replacement, despite that it is a bit different concept. Making the S9 as small as possible was the second good decision. The packaging of the internal components of the S9 is probably the most impressive that I have seen so far. Full-frame sensor is a very desirable feature for good reasons, and the option to have it in a such small camera is indeed interesting. Panasonic did not sacrifice the stabilization performance or the battery size, and those are also good decisions. Video specifications are very impressive as they are carried over from the S5 II with the exception of the recording limits. That is one of the compromises that the S9 owners will have to accept. The omission of the EVF and mechanical shutter in exchange for full-frame sensor, great IBIS performance and big battery is in my opinion a good trade-off, especially for the target audience. The only thing that I would personally change is the display mechanism, but objectively speaking, a rotating screen is what the market demands. I hope that Panasonic will continue to support the S9 as a subsystem within the L-mount by releasing lenses that will match the S9 size. As you can probably tell, I like the S9 a lot. It is actually a camera that I would choose for my personal use outside of this channel, and that means that I highly recommend it. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.